وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome back to our daily conversation during the month of Ramadan. First, I'll ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept your fasting, your prayers, your dua, your qiyam, and all the good deeds that you have undertaken. Today I wanted to spend some time on deciphering the story of Moses and Harun, Moses, Aaron, and Pharaoh. But in particular, how to understand and benefit, at least from looking at one of the narrative that is most extensively mentioned in the Qur'an. That the story of Musa alayhi salam and his brother Aaron and their encounter with Pharaoh is one of the most cited references in terms of the Quran. The Prophet Musa alayhi salam has far more references, and his story that is, or the narrative that is mentioned, is for us as a guide, not to only to think of the challenges and the tribulation he has faced, but also to make sure that we don't fall in the same type of shortcomings and the same type of transgression. Whether we're looking at Pharaoh as really an archetypal character in the Quran, that despots and those who really begin to put themselves almost on an equal plane as God, where Pharaoh himself is speaking to his Egyptian population at the time, saying that I don't know any other Lord to you other than myself. So he was in essence setting himself up as a god above the Egyptian and engaging in oppression as well as domination of the Egyptian society. But more importantly, the discussion that we are really focusing on is Pharaoh's relationship with Bani Israel on the one hand, and Pharaoh's relationship with Moses. Now, in the chapter of Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, Allah mentions His favors upon Bani Israel, and also mentions the tribulations that have been inflicted upon them by Pharaoh, and the miraculous intervention time and time again by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rescue him. And Allah reminds him by saying, وَإِذْ فَرَقْنَا بِكُمُ الْبَحْرَ فَأَنْجَيْنَاكُمْ وَأَغْرَقْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. That we have split the sea, calling or reminding him, and when we parted the sea, rescued you and drowned Pharaoh's people before your eyes. But before that, Allah is also mentioning them, وَإِذْ نَجَّيْنَاكُمْ مِنْ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ يَسُومُونَكُمْ سُوءَ الْعَذَابِ يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ وَفِي ذَلِكُمْ بَلَاءٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ عَظِيمٌ. And remember or recall how we delivered you from the people of Pharaoh, Pharaoh and his troops, his military, his ministers, his elite, that were engaged, who afflicted you with dreadful torment, putting your born sons to death while keeping your women alive. And that is a severe tribulation from your Lord. So Allah is reminding us and the children of Bani Israel to remember Allah's favors upon them. So in essence, when we are thinking about this narrative, is to think almost in a paradigmatic way or in a clear way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly showing His favors upon his creation, his um, community, even in the darkest moment. But more importantly, we want to draw some lessons from Moses and Pharaoh's narrative. One is to understand that the narrative of Moses tells us with Pharaoh that the decree of God, the decree of Allah, Qadrullah, will go forth no matter what barriers, no matter what challenges, no matter what oppression is committed. There is no way that God's decree will not go forth. Pharaoh himself was attempting to put to death the newborn children of the Bani Israel, the progeny of Bani Israel in Egypt, in the hope that the newly arriving prophet Moses, will not be born, and that he will make sure that this would not be the case. So in this sense, God decreed that Moses will be born, and not only that, that Moses will actually grow up, and that God's decree is that for Moses to not only survive, but he actually is to survive and to be brought up in the house of Pharaoh. It is only God's decree and God's determination of the affairs that Moses is to be born. And not only that, is the decree that for Pharaoh to take care of Moses in his own household. That is to understand that when Allah determines and decrees something, that decree from God will go forth no matter what the consequences, no matter what the determination that will actually face us. So in this sense, to understand that this is the case in relations to the narrative of Moses, and in general in the narrative that we are speaking about. So the Qadarullahi nafid, that the decree of Allah will go forth no matter what barriers that could be placed or set at this particular time. The second part in here is to understand that in that the hearts of the human being, that the outlook of what happens within the human being's innermost is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in here, if we look that that Pharaoh's action of trying to put children of Bani Israel, the newborn children of Bani Israel, to death, would have made it possible that Moses will be put to death, and in essence tormenting Moses' mother's heart for the loss of her child, which is one of the major calamities that might befall any mother losing her new child. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likewise that softened the heart of Pharaoh's own wife to incline toward Moses, and in essence to be a second mother for him simultaneously, since he was put on a basket in the river and to be picked up by the house of Pharaoh, and in particular his wife, leaning her heart to him, to Moses, which is also that her heart, or the hearts of humanity as a whole, is in the hands of God and nobody else's hands. So that's also another lesson for us to understand, that the hearts of creation is in the hands of Allah and not in the hand of anyone. A third lesson to be deduced from the narrative of Moses and Pharaoh is that no one can corrupt another human being. A person has to take their own free will toward becoming corrupt and toward being uh, 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 moved toward a disposition of corruption. So, in essence, if you look, Pharaoh used to tell his people, "Ana rabbukum al-a'la." I am your exalted Lord. I am your God, the exalted God of you, meaning the Egyptians. While in the same household, his own wife Asiya, in the next door room, glorifying God and believing in God. So, in essence, the fact that they were in the same household, living in the same environment, did not produce the corruption that we might be thinking about at this particular time. So no one is responsible for the corruption of another individual. Each individual is responsible for his or her affairs. The fact that you have somebody insinuate to you, influence you, peer pressure, all those are elements that you as an individual have to take responsibility for, and you as an individual have to take account for your free will in order for you to engage in whatever corruption and whatever direction that you are pursuing. So in this sense, one can actually really understand from this story the how individuals who might be in the same environment and in the same atmosphere and even in the same household can emerge and take a different direction. And the narrative of Pharaoh being again in the utmost in disobedience to Allah and appointing himself as a god over his people with oppression and might and power, while in the same household his wife was turning toward Allah in a state of glorification of the divine. So this is at least point out to it, and with it we also can say that it is not the household that makes the enjoining of people, but rather the hearts. So you might have a relationship in a household with a husband and wife, but your hearts are completely divided and separate. So the house can contain the bodies, but actually with a divergent hearts in this circumstance. And this is again a lesson for us to think about how to bring about a convergence and a healthy heart within the household. Another kernel of wisdom from Moses and Pharaoh's story, that mighty armies with overwhelming powers are unable to turn away, to divert an individual from their state of belief and a state of dedication toward the divine and toward God. So here Pharaoh brought all of the magicians when Moses came to Pharaoh with Aaron, with Harun, to call to Pharaoh to believe in God and to really consider his relationship both to his people and to let go Bani Israel into a state of freedom. And as such, Pharaoh and his advisors called Moses a magician. And they called him, he is really the head of the magicians. So Pharaoh called all of the magicians in all of Egypt, فَأَتُوا السَّحَرَةَ, that all of the magicians came, and in essence in a festival to display or to test and to put Moses' claim to the test, in essence, to say that what he was engaging in is false, is a form of magic. And the magicians who knew magic and have been, that's their work and job, and when they threw their magic, it actually could not withstand the miraculous power and the veracity of Moses with his staff that was turned by divine intervention into a major serpent that undone all of what the magicians have actually thrown. And the magicians immediately submitted to Allah, submitted to God, and as a result, Pharaoh threatened them and put them to death because they not only disobeyed him by converting or embracing the message that Moses has sent, but he actually claimed, or at least say that they conspired against him. So in here, Pharaoh with his might and power, with also offering the magicians reward if they would actually succeed in challenging Moses. But what ended up is that the magicians themselves submitted to God and believed in the God of Moses. So this is also gives us an indication of what transpired in terms that no army, no power, no might can alter the heart of a believer or a heart of an individual that it commits to recognizing the divine and seeing the signs of the power of the divine manifested in this sense. More critically also, from the story of Moses and Pharaoh, which often has been a major narrative used for liberation theology, for articulating how one or how individuals or societies can overcome their oppression, because it's really it's one of the monumental narratives of overcoming trials and tribulations against an overwhelming array of forces, and Moses and his brother Aaron coming with nothing other than a staff in their hand, walking into the court of Pharaoh and speaking to him of words that God have conveyed to them to convey to Pharaoh. And in this sense, it illustrates, one is the power of the word itself, and also the power of belief as a foundation for liberation and for bringing about a challenge to oppression. So Moses and Pharaoh really represents the one model that the Qur'an all offers in terms of how to challenge oppression and how to actually call people to truth, to justice, to dignity, and also to, at the time, to end the enslavement of Bani Israel, of the children of Israel in Egypt at the time, and defeat Pharaoh with all his might and all his power entrapment. So this is actually gives us this narrative. But critically is that the people around Pharaoh, basically he took them lightly, right? استخف أهله, meaning that he take them for fools, and in essence they accepted to be in that state, and in essence took them down a path of that led to their own destruction. So in this sense, there is a relationship. Oppression does not develop by its own, rather the people themselves begin to accept, as well as bolster the oppression, or bolster the oppressor in there, thus empowering him over their own selves. So in essence, we could say, and we're reminded possibly here of Stephen's Biko, the most dangerous weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. That is exactly can be seen in the relationship of Pharaoh to his people, who actually accepted his role, and in essence they obeyed all of his command and all of his vanities that ended up leading them to destruction. So it's not sufficient as we speak about a method or approach to liberation. If we study the Pharaonic model, is not enough to actually speak of Pharaoh, but also to speak of all the people that in essence were supporting, were part of his entourage, part of actually believing in him, because he actually took them for a if you say a mental ride in this sense, and in essence they didn't stop or challenge his authority and power as it unfolded itself in a more and more oppressive structures and relations to the population. So in here, it is not sufficient to say that this person is oppressive or an oppressor, while absolving the majority of the population that went along with him for a variety of reasons. Some maybe in the immediate circle benefit from it, financially, position-wise, and so on, and some others might actually not be in that circumstance. But in here is to understand that it's a co-relationship between the oppressor and the population that follow him. The other element in here is that that the tools of resistance can be many, and the clear example is in here is that Moses' staff, which was only a staff that he walks around, it's a stick that he leaned on, became a major tool by divine intervention, but as well as becoming a tool of empowerment. So we could actually deduce from this that the tools of resistance, the tools of empowerment, the tools that could be used are many, and can be as simple as a staff in relations to Moses, but it could be any of these tools that challenge and at least puts the Pharaoh in here as archetypal oppressor and challenge his power, challenge his authority. So we often begin to look at the overwhelming odds in terms of power and the array of powers that are there. So Pharaoh had an army, had ministers, had a whole infrastructure, weapons behind him, and so on. And Moses had this cane and the staff that he's walking with. And from the outer examination of the picture, there is no comparison between Pharaoh and the array of tools and elements that at his disposal versus Moses. But this is one dimension of examining these relations and not thinking about the small tools and the small elements that would be at the disposal of individuals resisting, that their self might be equal in power, if not more powerful. But in here we are speaking with divine manifestation of this power, but also it's applicable, in my view, to other elements of disparity of resources or disparity of power relations. This is understanding is that the hands of God is with the group, but also God is the all just. So if the cause is justice, the tools of empowerment, even they might be inferior or few, because they're leaning on the all just, which is the divine and God, that the array of power is unmatched. A staff is more powerful, Moses' staff is more powerful because it is based and leaning on the all just, which is God, versus the armies that are leaning only on the material that has no substance or reality when it's confronting and it's related to the divine. So in this sense also can get us to feel a sense of resolve in confronting oppression by understanding that it is not the material, but rather something that is far more greater in import and in power, which is in here divine power that makes the differentiation. So, in this sense, when we approach the story of Pharaoh in the Quran and with the story of Moses, is to take it out from only the particular and think of it as how it can apply as a methodological approach or as an approach to mounting resistance against oppression and to make sure that these tools that are deployed and the principles that are there are applicable and can get us into an understanding of how to mount this resistance at this particular time where oppression has become far more prevalent than at possibly at any other period of time. The reality is that the greater the oppression, I would say the greater possibility of mounting a resistance to it and leaning constantly on the divine who is the all just. So the narrative of Moses with Pharaoh give us an illustration that God is always intimately connected to engaging and to facilitating the struggle for justice. It might be long, but as they say, the arc of history tips toward justice, because the ultimate understanding that God is the all just. So whatever justice is manifested in the world and whatever resistance to oppression that is rooted in justice, then rest be sure that the divine is on the side of justice, and it is us who are partaking in this that are partaking in a journey and a struggle that is rooted in divine manifestation on this earth. So this is what I wanted to talk with you about today, and inshallah we'll see you again tomorrow with another topic. I ask Allah to continue to bless you and make it possible for you to have a blessed Ramadan filled with forgiveness, with mercy. This is also the time to continue to visit and recite the Qur'an. It is also a month of generosity. The Prophet ﷺ is the most generous and was most generous during the month of Ramadan. So I encourage people to continue to find ways to express generosities in small and meaningful ways. So generosity is one of the characters of our deen, and Ramadan is a month of blessings to continue to extend blessings and manifest this generosity, especially as we still facing COVID-19, with many people feeling insecure, having food insecurity. So in the month of Ramadan, to be able to extend the support for them. So thank you for being with me today, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.